When Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the HBO studio stage, she carried evidence nobody saw coming. In the next 30 seconds, she left Bill Maher utterly speechless, a moment that could forever change how political talk shows operate. That evening, no one expected this interview to stand out. The show rolled along its usual track. Bill Maher, flashing his signature smirk, stood center stage, his sharp blue suit gleaming under blazing studio lights. The audience, primed for his razor wit, fell silent as cameras captured every angle. The lens panned slowly, applause scattered, and the announcer's voice rang out. And now, please welcome White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. She crossed the stage with unshakable confidence, her navy blazer crisp against a white blouse, blonde hair neatly styled. The applause was polite but tepid. This was Maher's turf, and the mostly progressive crowd viewed her as the adversary, the mouthpiece of an administration they opposed. "Thanks for coming," Maher said, leaning back in his chair with practiced ease. "I know you've had a busy week defending what can't be defended." The audience chuckled on cue, but Leavitt didn't flinch. She settled into her seat, gave a brief smile, and reached into a slim leather portfolio. "Actually, Bill, before we start, I'd like to address something you said at your rally with Pam Bondi last weekend." Maher's eyebrow lifted slightly, that familiar smirk forming. "Oh, you want to talk about that? Good, because—" But he never finished. What Leavitt pulled out next silenced not just Maher, but the entire studio, a shock that gripped every heart in the room. If you're seeing this showdown for the first time, hit like and subscribe to catch our analysis of how this explosive clash is reshaping the media landscape for America. For months, Bill Maher had positioned himself as a political centrist, a voice that could slam both sides equally. On Real Time, he claimed he was only after honest debate, not tied to any party. His growing popularity among moderates came from this image, a rare media figure willing to call out extremism, left or right. But last weekend, at a rally with former Attorney General Pam Bondi, he delivered what he called a nonpartisan critique of the current administration. The media ate it up, praising Maher for speaking truth to power, no matter his leanings. But Karoline Leavitt, at just 27, the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history, was watching closely. Sharp, quick-witted, and meticulously prepared, she'd risen fast in political communications. Critics dismissed her as green, a Gen Z puppet reading scripts. They missed her knack for dissecting media narratives, spotting inconsistencies others overlooked. As Maher's audience settled in, expecting their host to put a young conservative on the ropes, Leavitt had other plans. The stakes were sky high, not just for her credibility, but for exposing how media titans shape political narratives while cloaked in neutrality. "You've built your whole brand on being a centrist," Leavitt began, her voice calm but firm. "Someone who hits both sides equally, who hasn't picked a team." She placed a folder on the table, its presence shifting the air. "But that's not quite true, is it, Bill?" Maher leaned forward, confident but wary. "I call it like I see it. Sometimes the left, sometimes the right. At the Bondi rally, I said, and I quote, 'I'm just a comedian looking for truth, not pushing anyone's agenda.'" Leavitt locked eyes with him, her expression deadly serious. "That's your public position, right?" "Absolutely," Maher replied, glancing at the folder. "What's your point?" With deliberate calm, Leavitt opened it. "My point is, your private communications tell a very different story." The audience murmured. This wasn't the defensive talking points they expected. The studio's atmosphere crackled with tension. Maher's producer, visible in the wings, stepped closer, suddenly alert. "What exactly are you implying?" Maher asked, his smirk fading. "I'm not implying anything," Leavitt said, her voice slicing through the unease. "I'm about to show proof." As she began, chaos stirred. Maher's producers tried to interrupt. One approached the stage, signaling a commercial break. The floor director made a throat-cutting motion, the universal sign to stop filming. But Maher, perhaps sensing that halting now would look worse, waved them off. "Let's hear what she's got," he said, his casual tone forced. The studio buzzed with electric anticipation as the cameras kept rolling. Leavitt pulled out the first document, a printed email with sections highlighted in yellow. "This is an email from your personal account to Pam Bondi, sent 3 weeks before the rally," she said, sliding it across. "You wrote, and I quote, 'We need to coordinate our messaging to maximize impact against the administration. My team will work with yours on talking points.'" The audience stirred, whispers rising. These weren't the words of a neutral comedian chasing truth. Maher glanced at the paper, his face tightening. Context matters. This was about aligning on facts, not politics. "Then let's add more context," Leavitt said, unruffled. She drew a second document. "This is a text exchange between you and Ms. Bondi, 2 days before the rally." She placed it beside the email. "Here, you write, 'The key is maintaining my public neutrality while pushing the narrative. My audience trusts me because they think I'm not on a team.'" A gasp rippled through the crowd. Maher's face flushed. "Where did you get these?" he demanded, his voice low but caught by the mic. "That's not the question you should be asking," Leavitt replied coolly. "The question is, are they real?" Maher stared at the documents, then at her. For perhaps the first time in his career, the quick-witted host was at a loss. The audience, sensing a seismic shift, fell silent. "These are private communications, taken out of context," Maher finally said, regaining some composure, "and possibly obtained illegally." "They're not illegally obtained," Leavitt countered, "and they're not out of context. I have the complete exchanges right here." She tapped the folder. "Including your strategy for keeping a neutral public image while privately working to undermine the administration." Maher's eyes darkened. "This is a hit job. You've come to my show with selectively edited materials to spin a false narrative." "Nothing is edited," Leavitt said, her calm unshaken. "But let's move to something that can't be edited. Video." She nodded off stage, and the large screen behind them lit up. It showed Maher in a private meeting with Bondi and staffers, time-stamped 3 days before the rally. "I'm playing the both sides card publicly," Video Maher said clearly, "because that's how I maintain credibility with my audience. But between us, we know which side needs to win in November." The audience gasped collectively. Maher stared, visibly stunned. "Turn that off!" he snapped, looking at his team. No one moved. Leavitt let the video run for another 10 seconds before signaling to stop. "There's more, but I think the point's clear." In the control room, producers scrambled. This was live TV, uneditable, unstoppable. What started as a routine interview had turned into a firestorm. Maher took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You've brought selective snippets to my show without giving me a chance to respond. That's not fair journalism." "With respect, Bill," Leavitt replied, "I'm not a journalist. I'm the White House press secretary, responding to your public claims of neutrality. Nothing here is selective. I'm ready to release the full communications and unedited video." The audience, usually Maher's loyal base, shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't entertainment. It was raw, unsettling, the unmasking of a carefully crafted facade. "Do you deny saying these things?" Leavitt pressed. Maher hesitated. "We need to take a break," he said, looking at the cameras. But Leavitt interjected. "Your audience deserves an answer first. Do you deny coordinating messaging while claiming neutrality?" The moment, replayed millions of times later, was excruciating. Bill Maher, the king of comebacks, frozen in 5 seconds of dead air. Live TV showed no mercy. "I have conversations with many people," he finally said, voice tight. Bondi and I discussed how to frame issues, yes. That doesn't mean I've abandoned my independence. Leavitt nodded slightly. So you acknowledge the communications are authentic? Maher's jaw clenched. Some appear to be, yes, but without reviewing everything, I can't verify it all. Private conversations, Leavitt finished, that directly contradict your public statements. You told your audience you were neutral, told rally attendees you weren't pushing an agenda, yet privately coordinated messaging to target the administration while carefully guarding your neutral image to keep their trust. The silence was deafening. Even Maher's staunchest supporters couldn't square the evidence with his cultivated persona. This is exactly the kind of media manipulation Americans are fed up with, Leavitt continued, her voice steady but fierce. Claiming to be an honest broker while secretly advancing partisan narratives. Maher leaned forward, defensive. Let's be clear. You work for an administration with its own issues with truth. This is an ambush. It's not an ambush, Leavitt cut in. It's accountability, the kind you claim to stand for. She turned slightly to the audience. Bill built his brand on calling out hypocrisy. That's exactly what I'm doing tonight. The camera caught Maher's face, anger mixed with the dawning realization he'd underestimated the young woman before him. He'd expected talking points. Instead, he faced a composed opponent with ironclad evidence. Where did you get this material? He asked again, tone grave. From concerned citizens who believed Americans deserved the truth, Leavitt answered. People troubled by the gap between your public and private positions. She reached into her folder one last time, pulling out a contract. This is the most troubling of all, a consulting agreement between your production company and a political action committee tied to Ms. Bondi's advocacy group, detailing a 6-figure payment for strategic communication services starting 3 months ago. The audience erupted. Maher's producer stepped onto the stage, whispering urgently. Maher listened, nodded once, and turned to the cameras. We're going to take a break now, he said firmly. But the damage was done. As the show cut to commercial, audience members were already on their phones, posting about the bombshell. Production assistants huddled near the stage, some glancing at Leavitt with a mix of shock and respect. Maher stayed in his chair, conferring intensely with his executive producer. Leavitt sat calmly, rearranging her documents. She hadn't raised her voice once. The evidence roared for her. When the cameras returned, Maher had regained some composure. Welcome back to Real Time. Before the break, we were discussing some communications Ms. Leavitt brought. I stand by my independence as a commentator, but I acknowledge some exchanges could be seen as inconsistent with my public statements. It wasn't a full admission, but it was as close as he'd get. The audience, usually cheering, stayed quiet. What Americans want is simple honesty, Leavitt responded. Not claiming neutrality while secretly pushing partisan goals. Not building trust with viewers only to use it for hidden agendas, Maher countered. And your administration is a model of transparency? Leavitt was ready. We don't claim neutrality. Americans elected us knowing where we stand. We're upfront about our goals. We don't pretend to be something we're not. It was a knockout blow. The issue wasn't politics, it was honesty. On that battleground, Maher's defense collapsed. As the segment closed, he tried to salvage something. Well, this has been illuminating. I appreciate you bringing these concerns, and my team will review the materials thoroughly. Leavitt nodded. Thank you for having me, Bill. Your audience deserves a fuller explanation, but I'm grateful for the platform. The confrontation ended not with shouting, but with the quiet devastation of exposed truth. Within minutes of the broadcast, clips exploded across social media. Maher exposed and Sook Leavitt receipts trended nationwide. The moment Maher sat stunned after the video became a meme, a gif, a cultural lightning bolt. One tweet captured it. Karoline Leavitt just ended a career built on the hypocrisy she exposed. News networks broke into regular programming. CNN ran, Maher caught in contradiction. Fox News blared, Leavitt exposes Maher's neutrality lie. MSNBC hedged with Leavitt ambushes Maher with alleged communications. The clip of Maher saying, "I'm playing the both sides card publicly," looped endlessly. By midnight, 20 million had seen it. YouTube comments flooded. "I've watched Maher for years, never saw this coming." Whatever your politics, this kind of deception is what's wrong with media. HBO called an emergency meeting. Maher's team went into crisis mode. PR firms for Maher and Bondi declined comment. The next morning, headlines dominated. The New York Times with Maher's mask slips. The Washington Post analyzing how Leavitt's exposure reshapes media. Variety declaring industry shockwaves as Maher's neutrality crumbles. At the White House briefing, the room was packed. Leavitt, cool as ever, said, "I didn't go to create a spectacle. I went to correct a misrepresentation undermining honest discourse. Americans deserve transparent media." The fallout was seismic. Questions swirled about other, neutral media figures. Commentators rushed to affirm their independence. Bondi's team called the coordination mistaken, but the consulting contract, confirmed by financial records, was undeniable. 3 days later, Maher posted, "I've prided myself on speaking truth to power. Last week, I fell short. Some materials lacked context, but my private communications didn't fully align with my public stance. I apologize to my viewers for this inconsistency. I'll reflect on how to better uphold my principles." HBO announced a real-time hiatus. Advertisers pulled out. Meanwhile, Leavitt's star soared. Once dismissed as too young, she was now strategic, formidable. Media trainers used her clips to teach composure and evidence-based confrontation. The incident sparked a national debate on media transparency. Lawmakers proposed disclosure laws for commentators' political ties. Polls showed Americans across the spectrum growing skeptical of neutral media. One voter said, "I'd rather hear honest bias than fake neutrality." For Leavitt, it was a defining moment. A routine interview became a masterclass in accountability, not through outrage but through preparation and proof. 6 months later, a Columbia professor wrote, "The Leavitt-Maher clash was a rare moment of accountability in a controlled media era. Its impact lies in forcing audiences to question the gap between public personas and private actions." In Washington, where reputations rise or fall in a news cycle, Leavitt rewrote the rules. The clash became known as the receipts, shorthand for evidence trumping reputation. "Don't get Leavited" entered political slang. Don't get caught contradicting your public claims. The legacy wasn't just Maher's damaged credibility or Leavitt's rise. It was the power of documented truth in an age of competing narratives. It reminded everyone, no charm, wit, or performance can withstand evidence exposing a core contradiction. If this story made you think about media trust, the gap between public personas and private actions, or how a young voice with facts can topple giants, subscribe. The political landscape is shifting, and we'll break down the moments that matter, the clashes that change the game, and the voices reshaping America's discourse. Because as Karoline Leavitt showed Bill Maher that night, authenticity isn't just a buzzword. It's the currency that truly matters in our nation's conversation.